Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr. Mescher's Lessons. In this video, I'm going to be going over Chapter 2 of Mice and Men. This is being made over Corona break. So, if you're also on Corona break, good news to you. You get to listen to my wonderful voice as I narrate, give some advice on this lesson, and have a general discussion about it. I wanted to make these videos for future reference. In case any of my students are absent, they can look back to this video. But also, the students who are having trouble looking through Chapter 2 or any of the book, hope that you can turn to these videos and it will give you a little more guidance as we work through the novel. Okay, so notice that at the beginning of Chapter 2 on page 17 that the openings are written like stage directions. The bunkhouse was a long rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls, there were small, square windows, and in a 4th, a solid window with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made with blankets, and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. It's written a lot like stage directions. For those of you who have ever watched a play, been in a play, enjoyed a play, written a play, I know a lot of my students are in the drama club, so written like stage directions, but let's consider what this place actually looks like. It looks like a prison. It actually sounds like a prison. Over each bunk, there were nailed an apple box, with the opening forward so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. As we learn in this chapter, these bunks are provided as part of the pay for the workers, but they make $50 a month, which isn't bad when adjusted for our current inflation. And it's work, which people in the 1930s needed. Very high unemployment rates during that time. Just sounds like, kind of like a prison. The way the food is served also kind of sounds like a prison. And it's nice that they serve the food. I mean, they could just give them their $50 and not do any of this. Charge them rent. Would you want to live here? I know that I personally would not. So we meet one of our first additional characters here, and he is described as this way. The boss was expecting you last night, the old man said. He was sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning. He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round stick-like wrist, but no hand. You can have those 2 beds there. This is the first character that we meet, and quite the character. If you didn't pick up on that, the dude has like a peg arm. So something happened, as we learn a little later in this chapter. The character that we meet's name is Candy, and he unfortunately lost his arm in a machine accident. But he's still working. You gotta be thankful for that. What would you do in this situation of the guy with 1 arm? How much work can he really accomplish? Now, they made him the cleaning guy of the area, but once they get tired of him and he gets the boot, what are they going to do? Now, this was a little before Social Security was invented, but I don't even think that Candy is quite old enough to draw Social Security regardless. How's he going to make a life for himself once this job gives him the can? It's another context we're exploring in this novel. We get a little more look at the kind of culture that this place fosters. They find a yellow can in the box above the bed that they were given, and he says, "Say, what the hell is this?" Candy says, "I don't know." We see that George says positively kills mice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of bed are you giving us anyways? We don't want no pants rabbits. What is a pants rabbit? Some kind of furry creature or itchy stuff, I'd assume, around the pant area, so yikes. Very crude language, but these characters probably didn't have, a degree from Oxford. So this gives us a different look than some of the stories we've already read. Also, we've seen the word a few times mentioned. What is a bindle? A bindle is a pack of personal belongings that each person has. Personally, when I hear the word bindle, I imagine... you guys know the stick. You see in TV shows, there's a stick. It's narrow and long, and then it's got the bag on top. You guys know what I'm talking about. They use it in SpongeBob a lot. Very funny. But I'm imagining that's about what a bindle is. Okay, so what is this situation implying about... Well, as we see our character here, our new one, Candy, he's like, oh, the guy who stayed in this bunk was pretty clean. He's cleaner than all of us. He didn't let any bugs in. He'd wash his hands before and after he ate. I'm going into weird detail to share, but why does he make it a big deal that he washed his hands before? Isn't that what you're supposed to do? If you're working on a farm, your hands are probably covered in dirt and grime. I would hope you'd wash your hands often. Not that. He would also, at meals, he'd peel his boiled potatoes and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was. Clean. Author's trying to imply that the perception of these guys are that they're not very clean. They're dirty. Most ranch hands aren't very clean. That's what the author is implying here. And then they're asking, what do you say he quit for? Candy says, why he just quit, the way a guy will. Says it was the food, just wanted to move, didn't give no other reason but the food. Just says, give me my time one night, the way any guy would. What kind of characters do we have here? These are drifters. Think if any of you have ever worked a job, I've worked at several places where the turnover rate is just incredulous. It's hard to believe. People come in, work for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, then they leave. It's like they get their check and they bounce on to the next job, to the next adventure. I don't know what they're doing. But all of these guys are drifters. He says the way any guy would. So Candy is saying, well, I don't blame him for skipping town. Okay. So what kind of guy is the boss as well? Kind of a jerk. He's kind of described on page 20. What kind of guy is the boss? And Candy says, well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, drink hearty, boys. Christmas comes but once a year. So Candy acts like he's a pretty good guy. But think of the bosses you have at work. Maybe think of some of your teachers. They might bring in a bowl of candy every now and then. Are they nice for a boss? Are they nice for a teacher? No, a nice guy doesn't sound like as much of a jerk as this boss is made out to be. But love him or hate him, you gotta have a boss, I suppose, at work. So guess it doesn't really matter your opinion. Might as well talk him up. So the boss is also described as, he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. Wow. Great guy. Pretty funny line. Yeah, you really stick it to those stupid farm hands by wearing, boots with spurs to show that you don't even need your boots to farm in the land. We all know people like this. They're just unique. Especially sometimes when people get power, they get a little clout. They get a little too much clout. And this ends up making them into a jerk. Okay, so we learn the full name on page 21 of our two main characters. George Milton. Milton is the name of a blind poet. And George says his name's Lenny Small. As we've seen this character described, it's kind of ironic for his name to be Lenny Small. Because he's pretty big. I mean, he's like gargantuan. So, interesting name. Okay, so let's see on page 22. George is talking to the boss and he says, oh, look, here we are. This is me. This is Lenny. I'm going to tell you all about Lenny because he's a great guy and he's just kind of quiet. But then Lenny smiles to himself and goes, strong as a bull. George scowled at him and Lenny dropped his head in shame at having forgotten. Can't help but feel bad a little bit for Lenny here. You know, it would suck to be in a conversation with someone and you're just not allowed to speak. Because if you speak, you're going to show the fact that you're not as high intelligence as the farmhands are going to want you to be. So you're going to get judged. So he has to sit there and be quiet. It would kind of suck. Okay. George gives him the excuse, and when you hear the excuse, this would probably make you shut up about making fun of the guy too. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's alright, just ain't bright, but he can do anything you tell him. Well, that's reassuring. You know, my farmhand apparently is just ain't bright, but he can do anything you tell him. Well, I suppose that's all you really need out of a farmhand, but not very reassuring. I don't know that I'd want to have a worker that his best friend just calls him an idiot. I don't know that I would want him. A little later, we see that Lenny asks George, hey, why'd you tell him that I was kicked in the head by a horse? Lenny isn't able to pick up on the fact that George is trying to cover their butts. George is making up a lie so that they can stay at work. What does the boss say after he hears their story and decides it's fine? The boss says, all right, but don't try to pull nothing over, because you can't get away with nothing. Sounds like a lot of the bosses I've had. And maybe they're right to be weary of their workers. Jobs that don't usually pay a lot, oftentimes the workers maybe slack off, maybe rest instead of work hard. So the boss has to come in there and be a real jerk, and the workers have to try to avoid his look if they're trying to goof off together. So this is just a very much a blue collar boss, you know. I'm watching you. Don't do anything bad. Okay, so a little later, he says, you said I was your cousin, George. And then George says, well, that was a lie. And I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. Really? I think I've heard some of these comments from my third period class about their friends, but it's just cruel. In my book, I just wrote in all caps, cruel. Yikes! Imagine if someone said that to you. Now it rolls off of Lenny's back pretty easy. I suppose he doesn't sit there and ponder, wow, if George said he would kill himself if he was my cousin, that must mean I'm not a very nice or good or decent person. Lenny doesn't ponder that comment for too long, thankfully, because that would probably hurt his feelings. But they're just, ouch. Really cool comment. Towards the bottom of page 24, a guy on a ranch don't never listen, nor he don't ask no questions. What are general laborers expected to do? A lot of blue collars, what do they expect out of their workers? Total obedience. A lot of times jobs may throw around the fact that You come in when I tell you to come in. You leave when I tell you to leave. And that's it. Does your boss really have the right to treat you like a mule? I mean, you are human. Now, certainly, if your boss is paying you to come to work, you should come in. You should do all your work. You shouldn't goof off or waste the company's money or time. But they really just don't treat them well. Hopefully all of you, no matter what kind of job you find, get a job that is not full of jerks. Hopefully you get a boss that actually cares about you. Who says, if you got the coronavirus, don't come in. Or, I'm really sorry that one of your family members died. Take as long as you need and come back when you're ready. If you find a job that actually cares about you, if you end up going to the hospital, they'll probably send you flowers. They'll probably say, sorry for your sickness. We hope to see you back soon. Miss you seeing around the office. Yeah. If you get a job that isn't as nice, and I've worked at mostly these jobs, if you end up in the hospital, they're probably going to send you a reminder that, hey, you need to get back to work as soon as possible. You're not getting paid for this sick time. You're not getting paid for this time off because you're in the hospital. You're not getting paid for that. We need you back as soon as possible or we're going to fire you. I've worked at a lot of jobs that treat you like that. Can you blame people like George and Lenny for drifting off? After working there for a month or so, they get their paycheck and then they leave. Can you blame them for that? Steinbeck is really making an argument that maybe we should treat our workers a little better if we want to keep them around. Our generation, the Gen Z, or I'm not even sure what generation we are, we're often touted as millennials. That we swap jobs often, that we're not loyal to a company. Would you be loyal to the place where George and Lenny work? I wouldn't. I'd get my money, and as soon as I got what I needed, I'd skip town. That boss is a complete jerk. Can't blame him for being frustrated with that. And then a little later, at the bottom of 24, George is asked, how do you like the boss? And George says, pretty good. Seemed all right. Really? I put in all caps with lots of question marks. What? Well, I suppose there's no point in George talking crap about the boss, so that's more of a, when you go into work and someone asks you, hey, how you doing? Maybe you say, living the dream. Or you say, another day. What does that really mean? Are you doing great? No. But to tell other people that you're having a bad day might look weak. Your job might not like it. If you're talking down about the company, it'd be a lot of trouble. So they don't have a choice but to say the boss is kind of, whether they like him or not, they don't get a chance to give their true feelings. Okay? So then we meet Curley. Curley is the boss's son, and if you've ever worked or went to school with someone who is a relative of the teacher or your boss, they probably get a little special treatment. If you're on the basketball team or the football team and your coach has a son or daughter who is playing on the team, they might get a little more showtime. They might get put on the varsity team when they need to put on the junior varsity team. Curley gets treated pretty nicely. Curley's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at them because he ain't a big guy. You seen guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy. Then George says, but this Curley punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny. That's not a threat. That's a warning. And I'm sure you've heard that said by all the tough guys around school. But, I mean, really, I would not mess with a really big, buff, beefy guy like Lenny. But I especially wouldn't mess with someone who has some kind of mental disability. because how they react, as we saw in chapter 1, they left town because Lenny did something deemed inappropriate with a woman. I think he grabbed her dress, and they had to skip town because she said that he raped her. So they skipped town for that. But sometimes people with mental disabilities, their actions are misconstrued. I wouldn't mess with Lenny. Suppose Curley jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curley is. And suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick on somebody his own size. So what he's saying here is that, yeah, Curley can beat Lenny up. But if Lenny punches him back, he's going to look like a bad guy. It's not very fair. Seems like Curley ain't giving nobody a chance. That's on page 27. Okay, so on page 27, we get a line from Candy. It says, "Don't tell Curley I said none of this. He sloughed me. He just don't give a damn. Won't ever get canned because his old man's the boss." This is where we hear that Curley is the son of the boss. And also that if he gets bad talked, if he gets smack talked by any of the people, don't throw him out. Now, for an average guy like George or Lenny, getting fired from your job, they already drift around everywhere. Not a big deal. But for someone like Candy, who only has one arm, one hand, is that going to be acceptable? Is he going to have an easy time finding a new job? It's probably one of the last jobs that Candy will have. Gotta be very careful because line here. Okay, so then we start to 28. We start to hear about Curly's wife. Note while you're reading, never given a name. Why? Is she just not an important character? Well, if you read to the end of the book, you'll see that she's a recurring character. She stays through the entire novel. Why do you think that she's not given a name? Towards the top of page 28. Well, she's got the eye. The eye. They think that Curly's wife is ready to pounce on anyone given the chance. Well, I think Curly's married. A tart. What is a tart? Well, after looking for a definition of a woman being described as a tart would be in modern terms, she's a thought. She is flirtatious with lots of men. Do we have any reason to think that she's gonna sleep with any of the extra characters? Not so far. Well, she might have the eye. Look at him flirtatiously. But has she cheated on her husband? Has she given them a particular reason to be wary of her? Lenny hears about her and says, Lenny's eyes were frightened. "I don't want no trouble," he said plaintively. "Don't let him Sarge." And then that's their first fight that they have between Lenny. Seems like things are already going to get out of hand pretty quickly. Okay, so and George and Lenny start to have a plan. George says, "I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly bastard. I hoped we was going to get a little steak together, maybe $100. $100 in a month? They're hoping they'd get their money, but they've already given up. Tells us that they've already given up. What kind of is Curly's wife? She had full rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. She says, "I'm looking for Curly." A little later, she says, "Oh!" She puts her hand behind her back and leans against the door frame so that her body was thrown forward. So she's doing a little something, a little maneuver like that. She goes, "Oh!" It leans forward like that. What do you think that's implying there? She's trying to look extra good. Showing off her physique. He ain't. Look some, she said playfully. Pretty flirty. And Lenny watched her fasten. "I'll pass the word you was looking for." So he's like, "Be gone, thought." George and Lenny want nothing to do with Curly's wife. Well, I mean, if they mess with Curly's wife, they're certainly going to cause a fight. So it's probably best to think of how this would make always afraid caught Curly's wife. Imagine how that'd make her feel. Sure, she sounds to be flirtatious with these guys, but really have a lot of people to talk to. If she feel kind of bad for her. Okay, let's see if we can find anything else. So we see that she's a threat to Lenny. Not. A little later, George says he ain't bright. Hell of a good worker though. Hell of a nice fella. Right. I've no. He's defending Lenny. He's kind of saying to the other characters, Slim included, this guy's okay. Not the smartest. So don't mess with. That's the kind of idea we get about that. Then on 37, that's the last page of the chapter. After a moment, the ancient dog walked lamely in through that open door. He gave my old half-blind and then lay down and put his head against the doorway again. He had stood looking. The dog raised his head, but when the grizzled head sank to the floor again. If you know, the dog belongs to Andy, and the dog is pretty old. Just like Candy. This dog eventually treated. Thanks for watching, and